All right. If you do not know, my name is Scott, lead pastor here at Gospelife. And right out of the gate, just want to let you know I got a problem. I mean, we all got problems, right, Kyle? And my problem revolves around an 85-pound Labrador Retriever who, upon going to the veterinarian for his annual checkup, discovered he had an ear infection. Now, I didn't even know dogs got ear infections. When I was young, our dog never went to the vet. My dad was a hunter, and we would at times get new dogs if dogs didn't perform up to their level. So this whole compassionate thing to dogs is a little new to me. And so my wife came home from bringing our dog to the vet, gave me this little vial of ear drops and said that the instructions are, count them, put 8 drops in each ear once a day. I tried that by basically cornering my dog, putting him in a headlock, and after 2 drops, realized this would never work, and so I squirted as much as I could get into each ear that morning. And what happened over the next few days in our home was an epic battle, where as soon as the dog saw me with a little vial of drops, he bolted. And I would have to run around and catch him, corner him, headlock him. And the challenge is Labradors have like floppy ears, so I'm trying to hold and pull his ear up and squeeze this in. And so, doctor, I'm a little ashamed to say that I didn't follow doctor's instructions exactly. And rather than 10 days of 8 drops in each ear, it was as many squirts as I could get at a time. And the nice thing was, he was Shazam healed more quickly because I ran out of the drops in about 4 days. And we had to quit fighting. My point is, I had a problem. And my wife helped me understand it was my problem to solve because, well, he's my dog. And so some of you, well, let's be honest, all of us, have problems. Can I get an amen? Okay. And so the question is, well, what are you going to do about your problem? Well, I think that's a good solution. Yes, solve them. God calls us as men and women created in His image with agency and creativity and will to lean into problems, to when we find a problem to solve, a conflict to resolve, or an opportunity to seize, we have a choice, step up and do that. Now, we're in a series here in the book of Nehemiah, and if you have your copy of the scriptures, you want to go ahead and turn there, the book of Nehemiah, and let's see, there it is. We have a study guide that's actually available. We thank you for your response to this. We had to print out several hundred more of them this week because so many of them went last week. But there's a QR code you see there on the top right of that screen. If you want to snap that, you can actually download the PDF version of this study guide. There are more of these also in the atrium. If you are at home watching, thank you, by the way, for making us your church home while you're away or not able to be with us. At our website, gospelife.com, on the landing page across the top, there's a little button that says Nehemiah. It's the same graphic. And from that, you can get the study guide. It's really a great opportunity for you to sort of deeper dive in the topics, the stuff we're talking about. In fact, if you look ahead, the text for every week that I or Pastor Austin or Pastor Terry are preaching, they're all there. And so you know, as any good student, you could work weeks ahead. Yeah, no, I wasn't ever that student either. So, but you can also catch up and follow along if you miss a week. So that's where we're at. Look at the book of Nehemiah. Question is, how do I solve a problem? How do I resolve a conflict? How do I seize opportunity? That's the topic. That's what we're talking about. And it just seems like some people, they're more apt to do that. Some people are more willing to lean into problem, to work for the solution to relational conflict and to see an opportunity and seize an opportunity. People who are meant for more. There are people that have a problem to solve. They have a conflict to resolve, or they have an opportunity to seize. And last week, as we introduced this study of the book of Nehemiah, we're going to be in chapter 2 today, first 10 verses. Last week, we recognized that Nehemiah's problem had to do with his homeland. Jerusalem, not a place he had ever been. He actually had grown up in Persia. He was a high-ranking official, actually, in King Artaxerxes, one of the great ancient rulers. He was a high official in his administration. But when news got to Nehemiah that Jerusalem, the capital of his ethnic heritage, he was Jewish, lies in ruins, and that the people there were, quote, in great trouble and shame, his heart was breaking. He had a problem. Resolving that problem would become the life's work to which he would dedicate himself. And that would raise all kinds of conflicts, as we'll see in the coming weeks. But who are the kinds of people that are meant for more? In fact, we've sort of condensed the idea of a problem to solve or conflict to resolve or an opportunity to seize into that saying, meant for more. Not only am I meant for more, not only is this church meant for more, but you have a meant for more. That is, you have that thing that God's stirring in your heart, that problem, that conflict, or that opportunity that because of who you are and where you're at in life right now, it's come across your path, and well, what are you going to do about that? And maybe to help stimulate our thinking before we get into the text, let me just say this. People who are meant for more, they hurt deeply enough, or they care enough, or they're concerned enough to pray, to offer themselves, and to act. In Nehemiah's case, it has to do with rebuilding walls that at this point, by the time we get to Nehemiah chapter 2, have been reduced to rubble for 150 years. That's just after the Civil War, if we apply that to American culture. It's a long time. People have learned to live in their mess for generations. And yet when Nehemiah got the news of what was happening, his heart was broken. And he's concerned enough to act. We're going to see today how his first steps led to ultimate success as he pursued his meant for more. How do we start? One writer, an educator named Ben, he makes this observation, asks a good question. How does the work of God get done? Good question. It gets done by a person with a concern for the glory of God and the well-being of his people. A heart that engages in persistent prayer with others, claiming God's promises. A dedicated and involved person who is ready and willing to be used by God. And the last sentence of this quote really spoke to me. In every generation, these are the kinds of people that God raises up and uses to get his work done. When we talk about the work of God, I'm not talking about pastoring or missionarying or priest. Remember, in the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah is a civil servant. He's a high-ranking official in the government administration. He's not a pastor. He's not a priest. And his work of God did not have to do with the church or temple or, in our context, the church. His work of God had to do with relieving the suffering of God's people, of helping the people of God rediscover that they were living in a place called the Promised Land, that it was supposed to be a land flowing with milk and honey, but it was a land filled with rubble. It was a land, in fact, that God had promised he would rebuild and restore. And 150 years later, it was not yet restored. Nehemiah, maybe as much or more than any other individual, would rise to that occasion, and God would use him to rewrite Israeli history. As one historian wrote, and I read last week that quote, more than any single person, reshaped New Testament Judaism in anticipation of the coming of Jesus the Savior. That's a big meant for more. Your meant for more may be leaning into a conflict you've been avoiding. It may be acknowledging a problem that everybody knows and you know, but you've not been willing to look at yet. Or it may be an opportunity that's going to require risk and there's not certainty, but you have the clarity about moving forward. Let's look at Nehemiah's first steps and his meant for more, see if we can't learn some lessons for how God can use us in our areas of influence to make a difference. Look at Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1. Now recognize that it was in December that Nehemiah had heard that Jerusalem lies in ruins. Chapter 2 starts with a time marker, a check on the calendar, and we find that it is April. In the month of Nisan, I don't mean the car manufacturer, and the Persian world, that was spring. In fact, it would have been very near to the Persian New Year at the spring equinox, March or early April. And at that time, look at verse 1 of Nehemiah 2. In the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, a giant of an ancient king who reigned for 42 years, so he's about halfway through his reign, and Nehemiah has been a close advisor for a while. He was, word was cupbearer for the king, meaning he would have to sample the food or sip the wine before the king had it. So if somebody was going to try and assassinate the king, Nehemiah would be the first one to know. That's a dangerous job. But because of his proximity to the king and because of the fact that they shared meals together, he became a friend and an advisor. So God had uniquely placed Nehemiah in a position to influence events. And so here it is in Artaxerxes' 20th year in April, and the middle of verse 1. When wine was before him, I took up the wine, I gave it to the king. Now, in other words, I just went to work that day. Or I just went to school that day. It's just a normal day. My job, cupbearer, my task that day, I'm up. I'm on the clock that day. I'm going to deliver this glass of wine to the king. I'm going to sip it first to make sure he isn't poisoned. And, if a few minutes goes by and it's good, okay. And I'll go on with my day. I'm just doing my job. Now look at the end of verse 1. Now I had not been sad in his presence. 4 times the word sad is going to be used in the next 2 verses. There's a lot of emotion in this scene. Grief that Nehemiah has for 4 months been wrestling through, praying about, wondering what should he do about it. And so verse 2, the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing you're not sick? Now, your job is to protect the king. And if you show up to work and you're sad, the king might be thinking, wait, what's going on? See, Nehemiah was like the canary in the coal mine. He would be the first indicator something was not right in the kingdom. Was there a coup afoot? Was somebody planning to poison him? And the king just simply said, hey, I've never seen you like this in all the years of working. What's wrong? What's happening? And look at middle of verse 2. This is nothing but sadness of heart. You don't have the flu. You don't have COVID. You clearly are depressed about something. I mean, it's heavy. And look at the end of verse 2. Then I was, and look at the 2 modifiers, very much afraid. There's sadness, there's grief, there's fear. I am so thankful that God's word is true and tells it like it is honestly. You and I tend to look at Old Testament characters or New Testament saints, and we look at them and we say, oh man, they were like giants who never had any problems, or we have them carved in sort of ivory. They're cold and lifeless saints. That's not true. Nehemiah spent 4 months grieving the condition of God's people 800 miles to the west of where he's at. He's been thinking and planning. We'll see a little later in this text, he has an entire plan sketched out. But when push came to shove and he couldn't hide his grief any longer, and his boss said, hey, what's going on? He said, I was afraid. I love that. If you think, oh, Scott, you're talking about meant for more, you talk about goals, you talk about changing the world, love it. That's just going to be good for you because you don't have any problems. You don't know me. Here's what I know about you. When you think about change, you think about moving forward, you may be sad about something and you may, like me, fear the unknown. I'm just so glad that that's in there. Not that we sort of just, let's march on to Jerusalem and rebuild that thing. This will begin, we think about a 2-year episode at this point. Nehemiah will go on to actually be appointed governor and serve 2 terms, nearly 20 years. But his first 2 years are going to be hell on earth. He's going to have conflict and lack of resources and conflict from outside and conflict from inside and people rising up and complaining about his leadership and questioning motives. But in this moment, his fear was not about any of those things. His fear was like, my boss is calling me out. Look at verse 3. Again, I love the honesty because basically Nehemiah says, well, I'm just going to tell him the truth. It's a pretty good plan. We spend so much time worrying about what other people are going to think about us, and boy, I couldn't tell them possibly how I feel. And yet, getting Nehemiah moving forward as meant for more was all about being honest about what was on his heart. Whoops, that's the wrong page. Let me do this, chapter 2. Chapter 3 is actually 2 weeks from now. But all right, look at verse 3. I said to the king, let the king live forever. That's a good start. Compliment him and wish him well. And let the king live forever. Why? And I look, Nehemiah doesn't ask for anything. He simply honestly explains what his problem was and leaves it there. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins and his gates have been destroyed by fire? You want to know why I'm sad? I'm sad because I got news that the place that I love, where my family comes from, is in distress. It's ruined. It was, by the way, the capital of one of the Persian regions. In fact, look at verse 4. Then the king said to me, what are you requesting? I love that. We might have expected our boss to say, well, we'll take a half day, take a personal mental health day, and come back ready to work tomorrow. But while God had been working on Nehemiah's heart, God had also been working on King Artaxerxes' heart. And rather than shutting him down, he said, well, Nehemiah, what do you want? That's such a good question. What's kind of interesting about that is we know from Ezra, with Nehemiah's friend, but he's 12 years older, Artaxerxes previously had stopped the rebuilding of Jerusalem because people had tried it before. And the surrounding people had said, oh, no, they're trying to build it up because they want to rebel against you. Artaxerxes is like, all right, well, let's call off the construction. Here's his trusted advisor, heartbreaking, and the king says, what do you want, Nehemiah? That's a moment right now. I love it because look at what happens next. Look at the end of verse 4. I prayed to the God of heaven. What do you suppose that prayer looked like? Come on, what do you think it looked like? Like it was one of those, our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be. No, I call this a lightning prayer. God help me, right? I mean, the king just asked him a big question. What do you want from me? And I think just the whispered prayer. So some of you live with a ton of guilt, like, man, I'm not praying, 30 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day. Well, you know what? If your life's a mess, just say, God help me. Listen, he answers those kind of prayers. Amen? Now, Nehemiah had been doing the hard work of praying in his private world, but in this case, it's like, I'm in a crisis. Don't you think, well, I couldn't possibly ask God? No, you can ask God. I think it's probably a little better to ask him if you do have a relationship, but God answered this prayer. So look what he says. So I prayed to the king of the God of heaven, verse 5, and I said to the king, what follows is audacious, bold. It's a big ask. If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I circled the next two words in my Bible, send me. Like, I'll be the solution, king. I'm not asking you to solve my problem. I'll solve the problem. By the way, if you're an employee, it's always good if you're going to bring a problem to a supervisor or a division leader if you also bring a proposed solution. It's good. My heart's breaking. You've seen that. Send me to fix it. And look at what he asked for. Send me that I may rebuild it. You mean that construction project I stopped a few years, that one? Send me back. I want to be the new guy in charge. You mean you want to leave working for me? This is a cushy job, Nehemiah. You're in the Washington, D.C. of the ancient world. You don't have calluses on your hands. You're going to go run a construction project? Boy, God stirs your heart for a meant for more, and sometimes crazy ideas come into your mind. And I love that the king didn't lead with, no! Look at what happens next. Verse 6, the king said to me, and it's an interesting little editorial comment here that Nehemiah writes down in his journal, the queen sitting beside him. I'll tell you why it's there. I don't know. And everything I read this week, nobody knows. Could it be that Nehemiah was a favorite of the queen? Could it be that we know the queen's name? I can't pronounce it, but she's known from other historical documents, and she was a strong queen, and so maybe she, leaned over like, come on, let the guy go. But there's that note that she was there, and he doesn't say no. Look at what he says. Good supervisor, he just asked for more information. How long will you be gone? When will you return? Now, the fact that Nehemiah has all these answers tells me that in the 4 months between hearing the problem and having the opportunity to present the problem to his supervisor, he had been thinking and praying and working on the solution. So look at end of verse 6. So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, right? No, wait. So king's like, okay, sure. And we don't know. We think it was about 2 years would be the time that he said, if you kind of do the math later in the book. It took him about 2 years to get this thing done. So the king's like, all right, yeah, 2 years, sure. Why not? Go. And, if it's me, I'm like packing my bags, I'm ordering my flight, I'm like, great. But Nehemiah was way better than I am when it comes to planning. And so before he turns off and, turns around and runs out of the throne room, this guy, 2 more requests. Verse 7, I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to me to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah. He wants a passport. Okay, if I'm going, so think of it this way. If you're in Indiana and you're going to go to work in Wisconsin, you got to pass through Illinois on the way. And this is totally what's going on. And let's just say politicians in Illinois may want to have a little something as you pass through. There's going to be a toll. And so Nehemiah's like, hey, can I get a letter from the king saying I'm doing your work, and so no taxes, no tolls on the way? It's a smart dude. And look at verse 8, and a letter to Asaph. That's interestingly enough a Jewish or a Hebrew name, so we know this was another Jewish person. A letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest. So Solomon had years before created this beautiful national park or state park south of Jerusalem, and it's called the King's Forest, and it grew oaks and terebinths and beeches and poplars and things like that. So here's what Nehemiah is asking for. Give me a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the King's Forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, for the wall of the city, and the house that I shall occupy. So wait, you're going to build the wall, and you're going to build a fortress around the temple, and did you say you're going to build a house for yourself, like a governor's mansion? Yeah. I love it. Look at the end of verse 8, and the king granted me what I asked. So he walked out with a passport, a letter. He walked out with credit card for Home Depot, or Lowe's or Menards, wherever you prefer to buy your lumber. Wheaton lumber is really good. And no limit on the card. Love this guy. Brilliant leader. We'll find out later. Project manager and visionary. But that's not where the credit goes. Look at the end of verse 8. The king granted me what I asked for the good hand of my God was upon me. I just want to live there. Good, the Hebrew word could be translated the gracious hand of God. It's interesting how these verses start with such negative emotions, sad, angry, fear, and ends with grace. The God had so stirred the heart of the king that Nehemiah's 4 months of grieving and planning and praying brought yes, 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 yes. Now, look at verses 9 and 10, we'll rest it here today. Tomorrow, next week, we'll pick up with what did he do when he got there? Like, how do you start a big project? But here's where some of this verses 9 and 10 are transitional, and the scene shifts from Susa, from Persia, to all the way back in Jerusalem, a place, as far as we know, Nehemiah had never been. And I came to the governors of the province beyond the river and gave them the king's letter. I love that. But, hey, guys, see? No tolls for me. And now look at the fourth thing he'd asked for. Now the king had sent with me officers of the army and horsemen. It's like he's got a royal cavalry with him too. It's like, what did Al Capone say? You can get more with a smile and a gun than just a smile. Nehemiah's like, I got letters from the king, but I've also got the swordsmen and the archers of the king. So like, well, they're going to stand up and pay attention. And look at verse 10. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah and the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly. There's more emotion. These guys are angry. They're going to become the foils in this entire book. They're going to cause problem after problem. We know Sanballat, to the north of Jerusalem, was a governor of a small region there called Samaria. We know Tobiah from other historical documents. He was a very influential family to the east, a place called Ammon, to the east of Jerusalem. So the suburbs of Jerusalem, like they're stirred up about this building project. But I love the end of verse 10 because it goes to the motive that Nehemiah had. Someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. That's just good. It's not a building project as much as it's a project to see God's people restored to the things that God had promised to them. A place for worship, security, a way to bless the nations around. So the land is indeed a promised land. And Nehemiah, after 150 years of living with shame and rubble for God's people, Nehemiah, God stirred his heart to the point that he said, I'm going to do something about that. And it involved the welfare of God's people. Not welfare in the sense of handouts, welfare meaning they're going to be healthy and good. It's their well-being. That's good. It's interesting, and Hannah Harrington, terrific Bible scholar and writer, makes this point that if you're going to step up and try and do something, you're going to face opposition. But what doesn't make sense is that Sanballat would benefit from all the construction going on in Jerusalem. They could send workers. It'd be good for their economy. Tobias, for sure, he owned all kinds of businesses. We know that. It would have been great for the economy, the building and sub-companies being added and new people moving in. It's what every city wants. And no, they're against it. And, well, Harrington writes this, it's true that when God extends favor, one can expect opposition even from close quarters. Like God's stirring some of your hearts. You want to work to solve a problem, resolve a conflict, or seize an opportunity. And you're expecting the wind in your sails, or you're expecting people around you, especially those close to you, to be like, that's awesome. You forget that a lot of people have learned to live in their rubble for a long time. She writes, in this case, the opposition was illogical. After all, the whole province stood to benefit from the reconstruction of the citadel by the resources of the king. Apparently, Sanballat and Tobiah felt that their power was threatened by Nehemiah's authority. Well, we'll pick this up next week and finish out chapter 2 because the way Nehemiah starts is so smart when it comes to taking on You're Meant for More. But before we go to that next week, can we just apply this week's question? How do I sharpen my meant for more? By meant for more, what I'm talking about is there's something God's stirring in your heart. There's a problem near at hand that you can solve. There's a conflict you've been dealing with that you can resolve, or there's an opportunity that you're in a position to seize. And well, how do I get started? Like you recognize, right, through chapter 2 so far, nothing has actually been done. It's all feeling and praying and planning. And so 3 diagnostic questions we should probably ask ourselves as we try and sort out, well, what is that meant for more? And if I've already determined it, what do I need to do to get started on it? And first question is this: what do you feel? Remember just the emotion throughout. Nehemiah is a passionate guy, but throughout the book, but in particular, these chapters, the first 2 chapters of his journal. Before any work got done, his heart got stirred. You don't have emotions. You are an emotional person created in the image of God. The God who loves, the God who hates, the God who is jealous over us, the God who is compassionate. That we're in his image. How do you feel? What is it that's aspirational and gets you up in the morning? You're like, yeah, or what is it that keeps you up at night or breaks your heart? We spend a lot of time and effort, and at times it is valid, it's required, but we spend a lot of time and effort soothing hurt or assuaging emotions that are painful. Maybe before we go too quickly toward resolving them, we should live in them long enough to recognize God may do some transforming work in our heart through heartbreak. Dark seasons may be times of growth for you. So don't simply focus on the emotion, especially the negative emotion. Focus on what's causing that. What is the problem, the conflict, or is there a dissatisfaction with your current situation? That's called opportunity. Don't too quickly move to resolve that hurt, live with that enough to get clarity from God. Here's your meant for more. Second diagnostic question: what do you see? What do you see? Is the rare person, but it's also the person that will make a difference in this world, who sees past the problem to the potential solution. Sees past the conflict to a restored relationship. Sees beyond simply that fuzzy opportunity out there to the real advance that's going to make in your family, or your home, or your business, or our church. We can spend a ton of time identifying problems, and Nehemiah certainly did that. Twice he said, the city where my father's graves are at, where my fathers are buried, my ancestral home lies in ruins and its gates are burned with fire. He was very clear about that. But he saw what could be. Do you? I mean, just as clear as can be, can you see what's on the other side of the problem or the conflict or the opportunity? The more we live there, the more likely we'll get there. Be in your home with your challenging 2-year-olds and challenging teenagers or challenging 28-year-olds or challenging 40-year-olds. Be the person that sees beyond that to identify the absolute dripping potential that person has. It so relieves the pressure of like, I've got to fix them. You don't have to fix them. They're not broken. God created them to make a huge difference in this world. Can you see that? A third diagnostic question. What do you feel? What do you see? What do you want? I mean, just love. The case question is like, hey, what are you requesting? And Nehemiah's like, God help me. It's that lightning prayer. And then he told him, what do you want? I think we have Isaiah 58:12, right? Kent, you want to put that up there? This particular verse was written 200 years prior to Nehemiah's, the time we're talking about here. It was written by a great writing prophet named Isaiah, who looked ahead past the destruction that was to come in Jerusalem to the day of restoration. Look at what he says. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and raise up the age-old foundations. And look how personal it is. I'm just convinced Nehemiah read this and it's like, yep, that's going to be me. You will be called repairer of broken walls. How good is that? Restorer of streets with dwellings, meaning you're going to rebuild this city and people are going to want to live there. I just convinced Nehemiah knew that, and he said, yep, I'm going to be that person. I will be the repairer of broken walls. Will you? What do you want? Now, let me give you a couple of guardrails on these diagnostic questions. Like, what do you want? Well, you know what? I want a younger, rich husband. We had some widows in our first service. They all kind of sit right, and they just hooted and laughed, and I'm just like, well, you can have that. But for most of the rest of us, no, that's, right? So the question would be, does this align with God's will? Right? Does your meant for more align with God's will? Like, I want to win the lottery. I'm not sure that's God's will for me. Okay? If you're saying, well, you know, I'd love to see my family thriving, I'd love to see spiritual growth in the lives of my sons and my daughters and my grandkids, or I think I'd love to marry this woman and make them home together, and great, well, wonderful, that's God's will. Love it, great, go. Does it align with God's will? Second question, does your meant for more advance God's mission? Okay, so it aligns with God's will. God's will is a very broad thing, but does it advance the mission? You know what God's doing in this big old world? What God's doing in this big old world is restoring broken people to himself. Those who are lost and far away, they need to be brought near, and here's something about the hope of Jesus Christ. And by the way, can I just say a little bit about what is our church's meant for more? Right, this whole series is helping you, invite you to be with us on the next 30 months as we answer our meant for more. Two broad categories where Gospelife, we're just convinced we're meant for more, and we're inviting you to go with us on this journey. The one is in large facilities. Like, the problem we have to solve is there's too many of you to comfortably deal with, and we love you, and we're not asking you to leave, we're asking more people to attend. And so over in Carroll Stream, I think this week, they put like roof trusses up or something like that. I think the bricks are mostly laid, and good, it's good. And I was talking to a lady before this service. She said, hey, I couldn't go to the new members class over there last week because, I can't do the stairs. And I said, well, you are the poster child for why we're adding on handicap accessible bathrooms. That and the tons of young families pushing buggies in, and we're going to be building worship space here. I'm so excited at what Isaiah and the worship team's doing, of growing our worship, and to be able to be in a place designed for that will be awesomely good, and to serve the community for concerts and things like that. But every time we do something for here, we want to enlarge the facilities to serve our people here. We want to do something over there too, which means we're going to double our missions to give $1 million to missions during this time. And that's to serve our people over there, outside the four walls. There are community missions right here in DuPage County we support. There are community missions around North America we support. There are community missions around the world we support, and we are going to richly bless them, adding more partnerships, and it's our meant for more. It aligns with God's will, and it advances the mission. And so I think that so often is the case, you and I underestimate God's delight and his desire for us to do the thing he created us to do. The joy that we get knowing that, I was meant for this. So let's close by reading Psalm 16. I've always loved Psalm 16:9. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Behold, I have a beautiful inheritance. But as I've gone on a little bit in life, Psalm 16:11 means the world to me. Would you stand up and let's say this together? We aim too low. We underestimate God's delight in his people doing the thing he created them to do. So we're going to read this together, and then we're going to sing a refrain of that song that Manny led us in right before the message. Will you say this with me? You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Father, will you help us to have the courage to address how we feel, to see beyond the problem or the conflict or the opportunity, and to say what we want. To start there this week. Father, I thank you for Jesus Christ, who came to seek and to save that which was lost. What he wanted was restored relationship with humankind. Thank you for our story, Lord, of you seeking us when we were going astray. And God, more than anything, we want that to be the repeated story of this congregation as we serve this community. God, will you continue to stir our hearts to do the thing that pleases you, and that will indeed please us or bring us fullness of joy. Thank you, Lord, for your good people here. Lord, I know you're doing a work. Continue to stir that in our hearts, I pray. And we ask this in Jesus' strong name. And all God's people said,